Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. I love protein, you guys. One of my favorite foods in the world is a really great cheeseburger. And I know that I should not love cheeseburgers as much as I do because they are red meat, and I get that in many ways they are largely unhealthy. But how do we go about really picking out a healthier meat? If you're anything like me, you do not want to just eat baked chicken every day. I know it's one of the healthier forms for me, but I get so tired of eating baked chicken all the time. I don't want to fry it because I know that that kind of negates some of the health benefits for me. But at the same time, I would like to eat something a little bit different. Even if I'm able to season it well in different ways, after a while, that same texture repeatedly sometimes starts to get to me. So if you find that you feel a similar type of way about chicken and you're confused about how to pick out the right types of protein to fuel your macros, we're going to deep dive into protein today. So first up, we know that chicken, fish, and beans are said to be better for us than red meat, but why? Knowing why is very important for me for learning anything. If you tell me you can't divide by 0, I need to know why. Similarly, helping me make these decisions as to which meat I'm picking up at the store, instead of just basing it on flavor, basing it on what's good for me, requires that I know why. So if that is something that resonates with you, we're going to talk about that first up. In general, red meats, and that includes beef, pork, and lamb, have more saturated fat than chicken, fish, and vegetable proteins. So as we discussed in a previous podcast when we talked about different types of oils, saturated fat is the kind that we don't want. We want those monounsaturated fat and polyunsaturated fat. On the scale of worst to best, there is trans fat, then saturated fat, and then monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fat. They're together at the end. Now, why do we care about the types of fats that are in this? We're talking about protein, right? But those fats are really important because even though your body needs fats for processing certain vitamins and nutrients and for other general purposes, it can also raise your blood cholesterol and worsen heart disease. So if you are prone to heart disease, like you have a family history of it, then we really need to be extra conscious about that. If you're not aware of part of your family history, because like me, someone in your family directly above you was adopted and you do not have any idea as to whatever their medical history may be for their side of the family history, it's important to just also be conscious about playing it safe in that regard. So that's one thing that I like to keep in mind because one of my grandparents was adopted, and because of that, I don't really know about that medical history. Now, in fish like salmon, they are really just rife with unsaturated fats. So that is great. They in particular have a lot of omega-3 fatty acids. And as we've previously discussed, omega-6 fatty acids, not so great. Omega-3 fatty acids, those are what's up. Those are the ones that we are aiming for. And they are found in fish and some plant sources. So when you get those omega-3 fatty acids, they are an integral part of a healthy diet for your heart and can even reduce the risk of coronary heart disease, heart attacks, heart failure, and the most common type of stroke, which is an ischemic stroke. So it can help you all around. And there are a ton of different types of beans that you can pick from. So pintos, garbanzos, or chickpeas, kidney beans, soybeans, great northern beans, there are tons of them. You can also do some of the pea type materials, so lentils, black-eyed peas. If you are from Appalachia, then black-eyed peas is probably already heavily in your rotation on your food list. We love them there, but you can also have split peas as well. So if you like soups, more lentils, more split pea soups. Those are great for you, and they don't have saturated or trans fats naturally in them. So that is a very heart-healthy meal base. If you are going to be making something like a white chili, that is particularly going to be helpful, or an entirely bean-based chili. I like to mix a bunch of different types of beans together when I make my chilies. Pintos and kidneys for sure, but also great northern beans as well. And I like to make my own hummus at the house from chickpeas, so I know exactly what goes into it. And sometimes we also just cook them on top of the stove. We're not frying them in oil or anything like that. We just cook them on the stovetop in a pan. They get a little bit crunchy. We like to put a little bit of cumin on them, a little bit of salt and pepper, and just eat them as a snack as well. So they are really healthy snacks in general. We also are really big on having those snap peas. There are so many different ways that you can be obtaining these delicious treats and viewing them as a treat rather than as, a sad supplement for your meal or, a replacement for red meat. If you're viewing it as you're really missing out on red meat by eating these, then it's going to bum you out and it's going to be harder to eat it. But if you find a way to make it that you love, then it can really be a treat. So one of my favorite things to do is make a good hummus out of those chickpeas. I go ahead and drain it to make sure if there's any excess salt in the can that I get most of it off of there. Then I toss it into the blender, put a little bit of heart-healthy olive oil or avocado oil in there, some lemon juice, and I dice up a bunch of garlic. Go ahead and toss that in there as well and blend it all together. And then I eat it with cucumbers, typically, instead of naan. Now, I love naan, but, it's not as healthy for us as the cucumbers. So I do like to do veggie dips for that. But I also am not a big fan of dipping carrots and broccoli and stuff in hummus. So for me, slicing up cucumbers has really been my go-to. People tend to look at me sideways for it. But it's a nice snack for me. It's very light and refreshing, and it's a great way to get both your vegetable intake for the day in addition to some really great proteins. So if you like meat, like me, it's okay to eat meat as long as you limit the amount and you try to choose healthier types. If you are thinking about the portion size for your meat, it's about the size of a deck of cards. So keep that in mind. If you're thinking about a burger, then, if you set a deck of cards on top of that burger and then just cut around it and then stack the other pieces on top of that now square or rectangular shaped piece of burger and set the stack of cards next to it, is that about the same size in your head, or is that still too much meat? That's kind of the way I think of it when I'm trying to decide how large I'm going to make my burgers. Because one portion of meat's about 3 ounces, which is the size of a deck of cards. That visualization is really helpful for me, and I hope that can help you kind of visualize it too. Think about it as being like one pork chop. Those are generally about the size of a deck of cards. Or, a small chicken breast. That's about the size of a deck of cards. It just is going to depend on what you're doing. If it helps you, take a deck of cards into the grocery store. I know it sounds crazy, but you do what you need to do for you and your heart health. If people look at you sideways, they look at you sideways. It's whatever. They'll forget about it 20 minutes later, or maybe you'll inspire them and they will start carrying a deck of cards as well. You're also going to want to choose lean cuts of meat. That usually means it has the words round or loin or sirloin on the package. So think ground round or pork loin or ground sirloin, stuff like that. That's going to be very helpful. One of my favorite ways to prepare a pork loin is to slice it in half, essentially. So you can watch the Gordon Ramsay video on YouTube. He'll show you how to slice it properly, and then flatten it out. And if you don't have a mallet, that's okay. You just beat the heck out of it with the flat of your hands. I do that a lot, and then you can go ahead and season it. I like to put some apples on the stove with a little bit of bacon. I do love my bacon, but I put a little bit of apples in there as well, or a lot of apples, a little bit of bacon, and then some garlic, salt and pepper, any other seasonings that you want, and like a whole onion, and then that's, diced up. And then once that is cooked, then I will lay that inside of the pork loin and roll it up and then truss it up with the thread. Now, the thread or the string that you use for trussing meat, I know it can look really daunting sometimes, but it's super easy if you watch somebody else do it first. So again, my go-to is generally those Gordon Ramsay videos on YouTube, and he will show you precisely how to truss it up. And it's okay if when you do it, it's not entirely straight. The point is just to hold it all together so that as it cooks, it doesn't fall apart. That's all. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough to get the job done. Because it's not about making it pretty. It's about holding it all together. So does it hold? Then you've succeeded. All right, we're going to go on a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how to eat more poultry, fish, and beans.
Are you looking to learn more about the latest trends from the fitness world? Are you confused by all of the different trends that are out there? The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place for you. The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place to come for people of all skill and interest levels. Join us as we explore the latest trends in the fitness world. Does that new exercise really work? Should I try yoga? Whatever your question, chances are good you'll find an answer on the GSMC Fitness Podcast.
Before the break, we were talking about why chicken, fish, and beans are better for you than red meat, and a couple of recipes that I personally use to help me eat different types of lean cuts of meat and still enjoy them. So, for example, in the last segment, I mentioned the pork loin that I like to make, and so I don't put any other types of oil in it or any other types of fat per se, but I like to give it a little bit of flavoring from the fat of some bacon. So I'll cook the bacon off and everything, pat it dry, and then go ahead and put it into the pork loin. And I have it chopped up into little pieces as well, so I don't tend to use that much of it. It's just enough to give a little bit of flavor to everything else that's going on. Sometimes I will also put some cardamom in there and some coriander. Cardamom and coriander go very well with pork, and they are definitely, in my opinion, underutilized in a lot of Western cooking. They're going to give your food a more pronounced flavor with that cardamom. And with the coriander, it's going to give it kind of a citrusy type flavor, but not anything so specific as lemon or lime or oranges. Think kind of like lemongrass is how it's going to kind of come off. It's just a very fresh, light flavor that helps cut through some of that fat and meatiness. So I really recommend trying that type of approach for it. So you're still getting a little bit of fat, you're just adding it in a little bit in the form of the bacon while you're still eating a lean cut of meat. And since you're cutting these in kind of pinwheel shapes, it's going to be a lot less fat overall than what you would have consumed otherwise. Also, if you're cooking, you can trim off as much fat as you can prior to the cooking and pour off the melted fat afterwards. Now, I'm not a huge fan of trimming off a ton of fat before cooking. I want the flavor, and they're still recommending that you pour the melted fat off after cooking. So you can go ahead and leave that fat on and just pour the melted fat out after cooking. Especially if you're using something like a roasting pan that lifts the meat off the bottom so it's not stewing in those juices really, then that can be really helpful. You can also get those little wire racks to set it on so that it's not sitting in it, and it makes it easier to handle. If you don't have one of those in your house though, you can just go ahead and once you pull it out of the oven, transfer it to another dish. Just pull the meat out of there, transfer it to another dish, and remember it's going to keep cooking on the plate for a little bit as well. I also recommend getting a meat thermometer. I feel like a lot of people overcook pork and chicken because they're afraid of getting sick, but it ends up being dry and then you don't like it as much. So my pork chops, if you watch the Gordon Ramsay videos, I will cook mine like his to like a very nice blush rose color. So there's no more blood running through them, but that is the point to which I will cook it. And then when I pull it out of the oven, it is going to keep cooking for another few degrees on the plate, just because it's already retaining all of that heat. And then when you go to eat it, it's totally fine. If you're doing meal prep for the week, I also recommend undercooking it just a little bit, because if you undercook it, then when you go to put it in the microwave later, it's not going to be all dry and gross. It's going to be very juicy still and delicious, and then all cooked all the way through as well. So if you put a little bit of forethought into some of these cooking methods, then you can get a lot more out of leaner meats than I think a lot of people really consider. You just want to make sure that the things you're making are still juicy and delicious. That's why we order chicken dishes in restaurants, right? And you're like, oh, this chicken is really juicy and I just can't make it like this at home. That's just likely because you're overcooking it a little bit. As long as there's no blood running, then you are typically going to be fine. You want it to be like a little bit pink-ish. So like I say pink, but I mean like a blush color, just the barest tint of pink, no blood. And then it will continue cooking outside of the oven if you pull it at the blush point. And once it gets to that great internal temperature, you're good to go. So invest in a thermometer, a meat thermometer, or just check it by color and put it back in the oven a little bit if it's not cooking properly throughout the, final process. Sometimes cooking is going to be trial and error if you don't have the tools that we really need to check the temperature. And that's okay. I largely learned how to cook through trial and error starting when I was about 5 years old. It will be all right. And you can always cook it more if it is undercooked, but you cannot cook it less if it is overcooked. If you like red meat as well, then you can also try healthier cooking methods like baking, broiling, stewing, and roasting. Those are all much better than frying them, and they're great ways to do it. It's super easy. You have a lot of different choices in there, and that goes for a bunch of different types of meats. So for meats that are leaner, those are going to be better in stews because they're not as fatty, and the slow cooking allows them to break down. Similar thing works for a roast. If you're looking for getting a good steak that is more lean, I recommend a flat iron cut. They tend to be really delicious and a lot leaner than a lot of other types of meat, but also they're cheaper. They're just cheaper, you guys. They're great. They're still tender, even if they are leaner and thinner than other types of meat. It's not as different, I guess, as people would think it is. It's not going to be as tough as you might think it is, especially if you don't cook it well done. If you are cooking it to medium, they're very good. You also want to try to minimize your processed red meats. We just want to minimize anything processed, sugar, other types of carbs, etc. We want to get it as stripped down as possible. So they recommend not eating so much bacon, ham, salami, sausages, hot dogs, beef jerky, or deli slices. Now with the deli slices in particular, you really want to think about what you're putting into your body. A lot of folks are like, oh, it's chicken or it's turkey, it's fine, even though you're getting deli slices. I'm going to tell you something that really helped me reconceptualize this. And if you don't want to know about like how things like hot dogs are made, skip ahead about 2 minutes or so. But with deli meat, you notice that those butterball chicken and turkeys and stuff in the deli, they're huge, but they're all breast meat, right? So the way that they do that is they kind of glom them together and use chemicals or heat to get them to a certain temperature to denature the proteins. And when you denature proteins, that makes them a little bit sticky. So they stick together at that point and they compress it to essentially make this big old hunk of breast meat is what it is. A lot of times they will also add things to it like saline to keep it fresh longer and to keep it nice and juicy. So it has added salt and stuff in it as well. Deli meat is highly processed, even if you think you're just getting slices of ham or turkey or chicken. It really is all processed at that point. So if you're wanting to make sandwiches out of these things, you're much better off going and purchasing it as a whole chicken breast and slicing it at home yourself. I also really recommend a whetstone because that is going to help you get your knives sharp. You can buy them on Amazon, and you can also learn how to use them via videos on YouTube and such. I've been using knives since I was 13, well, older than that, but I got my first knife set when I was 13 because both my parents cooked for a living, and I'd already created my entire first Thanksgiving dinner at 11, where I cooked everything on my own for the entire family. So my parents were like, okay, yeah, it's fine. It's time to get her a really good knife set because my dad had his chef's knife set as well. So I've been sharpening knives a long time. If you're unfamiliar with that, be careful. You're going to want to use a guide and probably also some of those gloves that are cut resistant in order to make sure that you don't hurt yourself. You want to make sure that you're careful with it. But in general, the principle is that you are much less likely to hurt yourself with a sharp knife than with a dull one, because dull ones leave really jagged, nasty shaped cuts, whereas sharper ones are going to leave a nice slice that will heal very well. So keep that in mind. I want you guys to be safe about this as well. But if you want really thin slices of meat, sharpen those knives. A properly sharpened knife should be able to cut through a tomato in a very thin slice. You should be able to see through it, and you should be able to cut it in one smooth motion. So no sawing back and forth. And you want to use a straight blade for that, not a serrated blade. Serrated blades are for things like bread, where you're trying to displace the crumbs as you're cutting through it. Whereas with meats and vegetables and such, you are generally wanting a very straight edge blade to just slice straight through. All right, we're going to go another break, and when we come back, we're going to really get into how to eat more poultry, fish, and beans, since I went on about more meat for a while.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about some more tips for people who like to eat meat, including sharpening our knives. That is something that I think is really underutilized and under-recognized. Having a good sharp knife will help you with all of your food and make chopping up your vegetables and your meats and stuff way less of a chore. It's a lot easier to strip the skin from the bottom of some fish if you have a proper knife, and it's a lot easier to fillet chicken to make slices for sandwiches if you have a properly sharp knife. You're not going to get frustrated, it's not going to crumble as much, especially if you cooked it to a good temperature where it's still juicy yet cooked all the way. That will make sure that it's not crumbly from being too dry as well. And then you can effectively still have your deli meat and eat it too, but without having any of the preservatives or weirdness that goes on with the hyper processing of deli slices. So right now, I want to talk to you guys about how to eat more poultry, fish, and beans. So a lot of folks are like, where do I eat these for breakfast? Because in the U.S., we do not tend to eat beans and fish and such for breakfast. Even chicken is generally not a breakfast item unless you go through a fast food drive-through and you get some type of chicken sandwich or a chicken biscuit, rather, in that regard. But you can add any of these to breakfast tacos, scrambled eggs, or omelets. I am a huge fan of omelets. I love to put spinach in mine, some sauteed onions. I love putting some tomatoes as well as cheese in there. So I get my dairy servings in there. And, cheese just makes everything better, in my personal opinion. So you can't go wrong with a bunch of cheese. And it depends on what type of omelet I'm making as to what type of cheese I make. And then I put a little bit of hot sauce on there as well. That capsaicin helps with inflammation. So all the way around, I think that scrambled eggs or omelets are really great for integrating more of these foods in there. Now, might just be me, but I'm not here for making fish omelets. I'm not quite that enlightened yet as to what constitutes breakfast food. But a lot of times here in Texas, you can have breakfast tacos, and they are super popular. And you can put just about anything in your breakfast tacos. I have had shrimp tacos that were outstanding. Bean and cheese is one of the major go-tos here, but also potato, egg, and cheese, bean, egg, and cheese. You can add the beans as a protein in anything, to be honest. And they surprisingly go really well with eggs. You might not think it, but they do. You can also do a full English breakfast. If you like to have beans with your breakfast, that's okay. No judgment, man. Just go ahead and break out those beans for breakfast and try to replace bacon or sausage with a low-sodium, nitrate-free turkey or perhaps a veggie bacon. I am a fan of veggie bacon and turkey bacon, to be honest, but I am not a fan of turkey pepperoni. So I have not found one of those that I like so far, and that's okay. I don't like deer sausage either because it tends to taste more like sausage you would put in Italian dishes rather than a breakfast type sausage. So that's just not for me in that context, but I do like deer meat in chili and stuff like that. Now that is more of a red meat, so I digress in that manner. But if you are someone who's looking to get fewer processed foods and you're into hunting your own food, then deer can be a good way to obtain that as well. So it's going to be without nitrates or sodium in that regard because you have caught it yourself. For lunch, you can also use leftover chicken or turkey for sandwiches. So remember, if you got that sharp knife and you're not overcooking stuff, you can get those really nice slices like they do on the mandolins and stuff in the deli. You do not have to go to the deli particularly to get that. It's just about having the proper tools. Now, I know I sound like my father at this point when I'm saying that, so I hit 31. It's time to start sounding like that, but you need the proper tools to do the job. And it's also a poor workman who blames their tools. So remember, just because we've bought knives and stuff does not mean they're going to stay great forever. We have to maintain them. We have to keep their edge on them. So every now and then, I just turn my TV towards the kitchen, and I will go ahead and soak my whetstone and then spend like an hour or so sharpening a bunch of my knives. If I do this frequently enough, then I don't have to do it a long time. I'm able to just maintain the edge on it instead of having to really grind it down on the other side of it. But most whetstones come with two sides, the 1000 grit and the 6000 grit on the other side. Think sandpaper works in a very similar principle. And I recommend that one in general if you just really need to hone your knives and they're a little bit off. Now, once you do that and you have those things sliced up for your sandwiches, I also like to put some tomatoes and cucumbers on my turkey sandwiches. I'm not a big fan of turkey in general, but my best friend made me that sandwich once when we were in field school together in college and we were digging ditches all day. And that sandwich just really hit super well when we went for lunch. It was very filling, it was very light and refreshing, and you can use that super sharp knife to get those excellent small slices of it. You can also have a bowl of bean or lentil soup with vegetables you add in. You can eat a tuna sandwich on whole grain. Now, I'm not as huge a fan of whole grain. I'm still on that honey wheat train, but every now and then I will have some whole grain. I'm more prone to doing honey wheat if I'm going to have French toast or something. But sometimes with my tuna sandwich, I don't eat it on any bread at all. I will eat it on lettuce or sometimes a bagel instead. So more of a whole grain bagel. It just really depends on the content. Weirdly, because of the texture of the bagels, I'm more okay with the bagels being whole grain than I am regular bread. Regular bread just tends to be so soft that I find the seeds and nuts and everything and the grains that are chunky in the whole grain bread really bothering me. It's like too much of a juxtaposition between crunchy and soft, whereas with the bagel is not really soft, it's more chewy in a lot of ways. So I'm having to exert the same amount of pressure for chewing the chewy bagel as I am getting through those whole grains. Now, for me, I understand that might be really strange, but if you have texture problems with food, then that might be something that you can look into. And that is what one of my friends who was trying to bulk up in community college always ordered when I worked at the counter there. So you can do that with whole grains, with your bagels. You can also eat that tuna just on plain old lettuce, depending on if you've gotten your whole grains for the day or what your personal macro goals are. If you are wanting to not use mayo on it, then you can use avocado instead. I love just mashing up avocado. Sometimes I put a little bit of lemon in it. Sometimes I just leave it plain. And sometimes I just leave it in slices. But it can be really great and creamy as an addition to your sandwich that's going to give you some of that moisture. And really, moisture is what condiments are mostly for. We tend to highly flavor them in the U.S., like ketchup is full of sugar and stuff, but you can also use them for moisture in general. That's the whole point of putting mayonnaise on a BLT or putting butter on a BLT if you are me as a child. I was freaked out by mayonnaise. So you can try that with avocado, mash it up, slice it. It's going to help give you that moisture, and also it's just delicious. And avocados are full of nice, healthy fats. So you can knock out some of your macros all at once with that sandwich. You can also make leftover chicken into a chicken salad. I weirdly love tuna salad, but not chicken salad. It freaks me out in a lot of ways. I don't know why, but it just is off-putting for me. So if you are like me and you do not want chicken salad, you can have a chicken salad. So I will instead slice it up and toss it into an actual salad with a lot of great dark leafy greens and some pear gorgonzola champagne vinaigrette. It's one of my all-time favorites from Trader Joe's. It also has super low calories. It's like 60 calories for 2 tablespoons of it or something. And I usually don't even use that much. But it has some cheese in it as well, and it is Oh, it's just so delicious, but it's still a vinaigrette. So it pairs really well with chicken, that pear gorgonzola flavor. Highly recommend it. And then I usually toss in a little bit of cheese as well and some tomatoes so I can be getting that vitamin C too. You could also make a seafood salad if you want for lunch. I'm not as big on seafood salads, but I do like ceviche and I enjoy that quite a bit. So if you're going to take yourself out for lunch, maybe save up that one lunch date a week for going out and getting something really great like sushi or ceviche and pack your lunch the rest of the time so you know exactly what's going on in your food that you are ingesting. But generally with sushi, what you see is what you get. The only things that are really added a lot that you don't know about are perhaps like the rice vinegar and stuff that goes into the rice itself to help make it sticky. For the most part, it's a really great food. It's one of my all-time favorite foods, especially if you just eat sashimi. That is delicious. There is nothing like salmon sashimi. Even when I have the flu, I will still eat that. And I know eating fish while you have the flu, what? I don't know, man. I just still will crave that salmon sashimi every time. And also the wasabi helps burn the cold out of my head. And I appreciate that about wasabi. We're going to go on another break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about ways to prepare these types of foods for dinner and also the American Heart Association's recommendations.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Incorporate more poultry, fish, and beans into your breakfast and lunch. Now we're going to talk about how to incorporate those into your dinner plans and some recommendations from the American Heart Association for really heart-healthy meals. So for dinner, chicken breast is always the go-to one that everyone recommends. I get so tired of chicken breast though. I have some friends who are really big on their gains and they can eat a plain chicken breast every night with plain broccoli for a week or more. Like that's just what their go-to dinner meal is. And I highly respect that. But it is not for me. I try and I do eat grilled or baked chicken generally every week, but I don't really love it. Even when I season it with 2 different sets of seasoning. It gets old for me really fast. Just something about the texture too, I think. So they want you to remove the skin before cooking it though, if that is your jam, and then go ahead and bake it or broil it or grill it or roast it. Anything like that is going to come out really well. I like to roast Brussels sprouts to go with it with just a little bit of avocado oil on top of it drizzled and some salt and pepper. Sometimes I will put truffle salt on it just for a little bit more flavor, but without having to add a lot of fat. Really. You can also do fish fillets with lemon and salt-free seasonings. I like to do my fish fillets with a little bit of butter. Now I know you're not wanting to add a lot of saturated fats in here, but just a little bit of butter, like 1 tablespoon of butter is what I'll put in it. And once I get that tablespoon of butter in there, the rest of it is just going to be like thyme and salt and pepper. And it really brings out the flavor of the fish, and it's a nice savory dish. It's one of the healthier ways that I'll cook that. And then when you pull it out, squeeze a little bit of lemon over top of it, and I bake that in the stove. So whenever we do that, we also will cook the fish face down first and then flip it over so that the skin is down on the pan. And that way, when we go to pull the fish off, you can just strip it right off the skin with the spatula. It is super easy at that point to get that free. You don't even have to cut the skin off beforehand for salmon. That is one of my favorite ways to do it and one of my life hacks. But my roommate will also eat the salmon skin. So that is his jam. I'm glad to forfeit my share of the salmon skin for him when we make that. But if it's for you, you can also eat that skin. There's a lot of nutrients in the salmon skin as well. You can also wrap a whole fish in foil with lemon and onion slices and grill it. That's a really great way to make fish. If you put a little bit of water in there, it'll kind of somewhat steam it as well, which can be kind of nice and keep it super moist. You do want to make sure that you are checking that with a fork to see if it flakes. And when it flakes, that means it's done. So we want to make sure it is no longer translucent. It is opaque now, but then also it is a little flaky when you pull it out. You can also put garlic in there. I'm a huge garlic fan, you guys. There's so much flavor to be had, and it is just delicious in general. But thyme pairs really well with a lot of fish too, and so does rosemary, especially if you're using something like lemon and citruses. It's going to give you a nice, fresh flavor with your fish. If you are not into fishy fish, then try out tilapia maybe. That's a little bit lighter. I like salmon. I don't think salmon is a super fishy fish, particularly when compared to like mackerel. Mackerel is super fishy. I'm not a big fan of it. I'm alright with trout. It just depends. I prefer to catch my trout myself though, if I'm going to eat them. But if you are not well versed in catching and gutting fish and deboning them, then check out your local grocery store. And you can also speak to the people at the counter. And a lot of times they will have a lot of information on it. I know our cheese guy in particular at my local grocery store is outstanding. That man is like obsessed with cheese. And I thought I was obsessed with cheese, but he works in that cheese department and gets in all these different cheeses for them to try and then sees what everybody likes and doesn't like, and he tastes each of them himself. So he can tell you which bries and camemberts have more of a nutty profile versus more of a bitter flavor versus more of that buttery flavor and texture that people are going for, and how to pair those. Similarly, you can ask people at like the fish and deli counters as well what they would recommend, and they will often have something to really help you out with that. You can ask them for recipes too. Not all of them are going to be able to give it to you, but it does not hurt to ask. Also, at my local grocery store, a lot of times they will have recipes hanging out there on the counters, and you can either take them to go with you, or you can just go ahead and screenshot it on your phone. Or rather, take a photo of it. My bad. I do a lot of screenshots on my phone and also on my computer, but you guys know what I mean. Take a picture of it and save it. You can even heart it and put it in a little folder for recipes. You can also put beans, fish, or chicken on top of your salads. Now, I know beans on top of a salad. What? I don't mean like pinto beans or refried beans. I mean like garbanzo beans, chickpeas, that kind of thing. You could put refried beans on top of your salad if you want, to each their own, but there are different types of beans to try out. So check that out as well. I like to eat a lot of black-eyed peas with spinach, and my mom always made spinach by boiling it, and then she would put a little bit of vinegar and salt on top of it. And that's how I grew up eating cooked spinach. So the vinegar and a little bit of salt, there's no added fat in that. And you're boiling it in water, so there's nothing else added to that either. When we would eat that, we would eat it with black-eyed peas. It's really big in the South for New Year's celebrations, but we just ate them a lot in general growing up in the South. We were able to grow them ourselves, and it was really easy to make. So I recommend that as well. Even if you're not eating a salad per se, you can think of good ways to pair these together. The pinto beans usually just had a little bit of salt on them, and that was it. So those are really easy to eat with your spinach, if you prepare it in that manner. You can also make greens and prepare it very similarly, and they complement each other very well. I also really like the texture of black-eyed peas. They are a little bit different from other types of beans in a way, and they're also just cute. They brighten up your plate. They're really fun. So try those out if you haven't before. I think that they're really tasty and somewhat underutilized. You can also put fish on top of your salad. I don't tend to like to put fish on top of my salad unless it's like a scoop of tuna salad or something like that. But I will put shrimp on top of my salad sometimes and mix it together with some other types of seasoning that I don't normally utilize. And I also like to do a nice olive oil or avocado oil drizzle with a little bit of vinegar too. So you can mix that for yourself at home as well. You can add beans to soups or casseroles that you're making. I do love me a good green bean casserole. Yeah, I don't even like cream and mushroom soup, you guys, but I love green bean casserole. And my friend Molly is the same way. Neither of us like mushrooms or cream of mushroom soup, but if you put it on some green beans, we will tear that pan apart. You can add beans to your soups too. Check out some recipes from other countries as well. I recommend feijoada. So that is a Brazilian black bean dish, and it is very good. Roger likes to put chicken in it sometimes. I'm not a big fan of chicken in my feijoada, but they tend to put more pork type of meats in there. So if you are trying to get away from the pork and the red meat, you can put chicken in it, but it really becomes something else at that point. And that's okay. You can make fusion food. You can just draw inspiration from other recipes and then make the recipes your own as well. And maybe you'll create something brand new. But adding those beans in there can be really helpful. If you've cooked a ham, I like to do what my family and friends and everyone back home does with the ham bone, and that is stick it in the crock pot and add a bunch of washed pinto beans to it to use it for seasoning. And then you just simmer them in there in a bunch of water. It's really delicious. The rest of the meat comes off the bone, and then you can get rid of the bone, having done everything you can with it. I'm also a big fan of black bean burgers. I've not really had garbanzo bean burgers, but you can get those as well. I've had quinoa burgers and black bean burgers that I have made myself at home, and those are so good. Black bean burgers are my favorite vegetarian food, but sometimes I'll even put bacon on them, and I know this episode's about trying to get away from bacon, and I keep talking about it. But you don't want to have a lot of processed meat, but you can have a little bit every now and then as a treat. And my general point is that even though it's largely marketed towards vegetarians and vegans, black bean burgers are delicious in their own right. And I love their texture, even though I do not like most other forms of veggie burgers. There's just something about black bean burgers that's still really high protein, it's low processing, and it hits the spot. So a lot of folks don't eat meat for tons of reasons, and a lot of those reasons are for health, but you can get all the nutrients your body needs without eating red meat and without eating a lot of meat in general. 1 cup of cooked beans or lentils, tofu, peas can replace a 2-ounce serving of meat, poultry, or fish. And really that 1 cup is not that much bigger than that deck of cards. So 2 ounces of peanut butter is the same as 1 ounce of meat. So if you are making a peanut butter sandwich, boom, there you go. That counts, particularly if you put it on whole grain or if you are eating it in a vehicle like ants on a log. It can be really great for you. All right, we're going to go another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about cuts of beef.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Segment, we were talking about different ways that we can eat more poultry, fish, and beans. The AHA really recommends, the American Heart Association that is, choosing non-fried fish, shellfish, or poultry without skin, or getting trimmed lean meats, or trimming that lean meat yourself. And don't have more than 5.5 ounces of cooked meat per day. You want to have up to 8 ounces of non-fried fish each week. That's going to be about 3.5 to 4 ounce servings, so a little bit larger than that deck of cards. And then choose salt-free seasonings. So like those thyme and rosemary and coriander and cardamom that I mentioned before. Also paprika, one of my favorites. There are so many herbs and spices you can use to flavor it that are not heavy in salt. And you can also use those meat substitutes in your entrees, soups, salads, etc. for that heart-healthy recommendation. If you're going to eat fish, then non-fried fish and shellfish like lobster, crab, or shrimp are lower in saturated fat and are a really great alternative to a lot of different types of meat. So if you are not allergic to shellfish, then shellfish can actually be really good for you too. As far as selecting cuts of meat go, it's really important to understand the anatomy of the animal. That's going to help you out a lot. But if you don't understand the anatomy of these animals or you're not interested in learning it, that's okay. We can also read the labels and see. A lot of cuts of beef are lean or extra lean based on fat and cholesterol content, and that is regulated by the USDA. So for their definition, lean means a 3.5 ounce serving, so just a little bit over that size of that deck of cards, that contains fewer than 10 grams of total fat, 95 milligrams of cholesterol, and 4.5 grams of saturated fat. Now, you do not have to memorize these things, I'm telling you, I don't expect you to. But you can go online and check them out and really see what you're looking for. Especially in the age of the smartphone, it can help you out a lot, just referencing it as you go along. The extra lean cuts of beef, that is 3.5 ounce serving, so the same size as the lean cuts of beef, but with half of the total fat, the same amount of cholesterol, and about half of the saturated fat. So you may also see grades of beef like prime, choice, or select on meat packages, but that is a voluntary system for judging the quality of the products. So that is what manufacturers use for it. That's not the same as lean or extra lean. So that's not speaking to the fat content. That's just somebody going, I think this is prime meat. This is choice cuts. This is a select cut. That is entirely voluntary. It is not highly regulated. So you don't really need to be worrying about those words. You're looking more for lean or extra lean because those are regulated and have a specific amount in them. And that's the importance for regulation. It means they're held to the same standard across the board. It's not that we care that somebody's in charge of them. It's rather that we know that there is a measurable, objective way to view these types of meat that is standardized across the board. So you know that a lean cut of beef in, North Carolina is the same as a lean cut of beef in Texas, even though Texas is more of a beef state, versus California. Since it's regulated by the USDA, a federal regulation group, you know that no matter where you go in these grocery stores, if it says it is a lean cut, it's going to have no more than 10 grams of fat, 4.5 grams of saturated fat, and 95 milligrams of cholesterol. That is really the importance of these regulation companies and government programs that do this. So Prime, Choice, and Select don't mean anything. And we talked about that previously in another podcast, but I just want to reiterate it here. When you're selecting cuts of beef, you want to check kind of the extra lean for really the best ones that are healthy for your heart. An eye of round roast and steak are extra lean, so are sirloin tip side steaks, top round roast and steak, top sirloin steak, and bottom round roast and steak. And if you take a look at the anatomy of a cow, you can really see where it comes from. If you get it from the flank, you get flank steak, and that's totally fine. But if you get ribs, there are no lean options there. If you get the flat half of the brisket, then you can get lean meat from it. So whenever you order brisket in Texas, in our smokehouses, these places, our barbecue places, are so good, especially in Lockhart. My favorite one is Smitty's, and their food is outstanding. But they don't ask you just, do you want brisket? They say, do you want fat or lean? And you order it by the pound. So you're like, I want a quarter of fat and I want a quarter of lean. Just kidding. I don't order lean. Brisket is more of a treat here if I'm going out for barbecue. So if I do that, that's when I'm going to have it with the fat on it. But it's smoked. It's not fried in anything, so I feel less bad about it. And overall, it's a treat, you guys. But you can get it lean as well. You can also get shank cross cuts. So brisket is more around like the lower chest of the cow, whereas your shank is going to be like the upper forearm. The flank is going to be down on its lower belly, like right above your pelvis, like before your belly button, but before the pelvis. And your round is really going to be the rump area, as well as the loin. So T-bone steaks, top loin or strip steaks, tenderloin steaks, those all come from the short loin, which is about mid-back. Then sirloin is behind that, and then round is kind of its rear area from the back all the way down to the top half of the leg. So those are going to be really good cuts of lean beef. And if you think about the anatomy of this animal, then you can really understand why those areas are lean. Think about where you carry fat on your body. Think about where they may carry fat. Fat helps keep our organs all cushy and everything as well. We don't want too much visceral fat because that is bad for us. That means it's the fat around our organs rather than subcutaneous fat, which is that third layer of our skin. So there's a third layer in, epidermis on the outside, and the subcutaneous fat underneath the epidermis and the dermis. So it works very similarly for cows, and the places where they have more meat are going to be kind of similar to us as well. So just think about where it makes sense for you to carry fat and go, okay, yeah, I need a lot more cushion for that. They're in the ribs. I need it here, here, and here. So these are going to be really fatty. And in general, that helps me out. I did grow up on a farm though, and I've done a lot of science projects. I hesitate to call them science projects. It was my thesis and everything as well. So it was a little bit bigger than a science project as we typically think of it. But a lot of it involved non-human anatomy in addition to the human anatomy that I'm trained in. So for me, it's not that weird to think about it. I hope I didn't gross anybody out. But I think it's important to know where our food comes from. And if we think about it this way, it can really help guide us even if we don't sit down and just memorize all the bits of the cow. Now, that aside, if you are still not sure about which cuts of beef are lean or extra lean or really fatty, go ahead and ask your butcher. They are really glad to answer it. Ask the person at the deli counter. They are trained to answer that for you. You can also ask your server in restaurants to recommend lower fat options. A lot of times it just depends on how you phrase it, which context you're in. If you're at the grocery store, Lean or extra lean is usually what you should ask. If you are at a restaurant, ask for low fat, and they'll go, oh, okay, yes, low fat. So a lot of the same types of cuts of beef can have different names. Keep that in mind as well. You want to make sure that you're getting the kind that you want. Roger and I like to eat a lot of picanha, which is a Brazilian dish, and it's really a shoulder cap. So it also goes by shoulder cap and a couple of other names. So when we go to get it cut, we have to ask for the American names and everything, and they will cut it that specific way. You can ask your butcher for specific cuts as well. If they don't normally carry that type in your grocery store, the butcher at the deli counter in my grocery store will cut that for me. And he'll be like, do you want me to trim this off? And I'll say, no, don't trim off the fat for that. I'll trim that off at home or whatever. And he'll just give it to me in these 2 giant sides. And then I slice it into picanha at home. Now, he could slice it for me, but understanding your slices of meat and these types of meat is also really helpful for getting cheaper cuts of meat. So if you are looking to just make your grocery shopping cheaper in this way, you can process the meat yourself at home. So if you learn which part of the meat different types of steaks come from, then you can buy a larger side of meat and cut it yourself. And that's what I tend to do. I'm like, okay, we're going to get a tri-tip because that's essentially that shoulder cap with the picanha, but it has the fat already removed. And then I can just slice it at this angle and it's going to be picanha. That makes it really cheap for us to do that versus going to a different type of store or a specialty grocer where they are already marketing it as cuts for picanha. And in that aspect, I highly recommend learning just a little bit about the different types of animal anatomy that you're consuming and where it's coming from. So for me, it's partly academic based, but also it's largely cooking based. I like to know all about that so that I can get a better deal and I can cut it myself. Like I said, I keep my knives sharp and I keep my mind sharp in that regard as well, and that helps out a lot on all fronts. Then I can also choose the thickness and the serving size for myself rather than just going, okay, well, these are about the size of a deck of cards. I can pick that really out on my own. Now, if you're just looking at it visually, then get the ones with the least amount of fat on them that's visible. So when you say there's a well-marbled steak, that is what makes it tasty because it's fat. But that visible fat is not necessarily good for you. If you're looking for ground beef, get the lowest percentage of fat. So I especially do that if I'm making spaghetti. So sometimes you make spaghetti and if you don't drain the ground beef first, you end up with all that oil where it's separated from the tomato sauce. I make sure that that does not happen by largely going for a lower fat percentage. So we'll get I think there's a 97.3 that we have here. So 97% to 3%. So it's only a little bit of fat. It just really depends on what we're making. If I'm going to be making burgers, I want a higher fat option. If I'm going to be making meatballs, I want something more in the middle because I want them to have flavor, but I also don't want it to just be soaking in fat. So it really depends on what you're eating as well. The more you read about recipes and the different types of cuts of meat, the easier it's going to be for helping you choose the types of meat and the amounts of fat for these things. So I can also plan my week out and I can go, okay, tonight I'm having salmon. That's literally what I'm doing with the salmon recipe that I told you guys about earlier with that rosemary and thyme and a little bit of butter. And then I'm also going to this week have some pho. So we made pho last night and it has brisket in it, I believe, as well as some oxtail. So oxtail is really fatty, but we are going to eat that a little bit sparingly. That is largely Roger's meal. I'm not as big of a fan. But we know how much fat is in that. So the rest of the week, it's going to be things like the salmon. So it's just high in omega-3 fatty acids and not a lot of saturated fats. We're going to eat some more chicken. We already have those dang old chicken breasts in there ready to be cooked as well. And we cook all 12 of them at a time. Season them halfway on one side of the pan one way, half the other way. And cook them in the same pan when we bake them. And we're going to have those as our lower fat options, our leaner meats for the week. Now, because we know the types of cuts and we know what is in them, then I can think about that ahead of time and go, okay, I am going to maybe eat some spaghetti and I will put some ground chicken in it or ground turkey instead of ground beef, because you want lean meats anyway, and that turkey tends to be naturally leaner than the ground beef. So that's totally fine, because I was going to drain all that out anyway. Whereas with pho, part of the draw to it is the fattiness from cooking those marrow bones, or getting the marrow from the bones as well. So it's not just the meat, it's also the marrow and the fat in there, and it's a fat-rich substance. And we crave it because we need it for our bodies. But a lot of folks talk about humans in the hunter-gatherer context and how we moved from that to agriculture. But before all that, our human ancestors were scavengers, and they would wait until large predators would abandon the food that they had killed and were eating, and then they would climb down out of the trees and bust open some of those bones with rocks and pull the marrow out of there and eat that. And it's really rich in fat and nutrients. So if you love food like that, that's okay. You can have it. Just think about the other cuts of meat that you can eat throughout the week to compensate for that a little bit. So we're having fish, we're having more chicken this week, and we'll probably make lentils or something that's very much bean or pea based to help out our digestive systems and our hearts, mostly our hearts, because this is more about heart health. We're going to go on another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the best sources of protein for vegans and vegetarians.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were discussing different cuts of beef and kind of how to tell which types you want in the grocery store. Now we're going to talk about the best sources of protein for vegans and vegetarians. One of the largest concerns in the general public about vegan and vegetarian diets is that they aren't getting enough protein. However, if you are really conscious and put a lot of effort into planning your vegan or vegetarian diet, you can get all of the nutrients that you need. You just have to be open to trying these other types of food. And in some ways, a lot of them are very much processed. That's my big concern about it. It's not really how much protein I could get, but rather how much a lot of their food is processed for those proteins. But they do exist and they are out there. And certain plant foods have a lot higher amounts of protein than other types. You need higher protein diets if you are trying to improve your muscle strength and getting full faster and weight loss as well. So in general, having more protein in your diet can be great. And even if you do like meat, supplementing it with vegan or vegetarian food can also be really helpful since you're trying to avoid red meat but still get all this protein. So it just depends on your macro goals and your workout goals. But there are several plant foods that have a lot of protein per serving. The biggest one that a lot of folks are familiar with is going to be tofu. Tofu, tempeh, and edamame all come from soybeans. Soybeans are delicious. I love edamame. It's one of my favorite snacks. And they are considered a source of whole protein because they give the body all the amino acids that it needs. There are several different amino acids, and the essential ones that you need, you can get all of those from soybeans. Edamame is actually immature soybeans, and it has kind of a sweet and grassy taste they tend to steam them or boil them and added with, a little bit of salt, typically. Although I've also seen them added with garlic paste in them, which was really interesting. Tofu is bean curds from the soybean, and it's pressed together in something that really looks like the process of cheese making. So I think that's kind of fascinating that they're making like essentially bean cheese, and that is kind of what tofu is. Tempeh is made by cooking and slightly fermenting the grown soybeans, the mature soybeans, and then they press them into a patty. So tofu and tempeh are really close to each other, whereas edamame is more of like the raw form. That's the one that I like. I'm not a big fan of tempeh or tofu, but I love edamame. Now, a lot of folks go, Alex, how do you not like tofu? It doesn't have much taste. I don't like the texture. I don't enjoy it. The only time I like to eat it is when it's in miso soup, but I don't have that a lot because that is very high in sodium. So overall, I try tofu periodically in different types of arrangements and different preparations, but I have not loved it in any capacity over the years. That's just me. But that doesn't mean I can't like other types of vegan or vegetarian food. That just means that maybe that one is not right for me. Tofu does have going for it the fact that it easily absorbs flavors of other ingredients it's prepared with. So if you are looking for something to add to a dish that is very well seasoned, then go for tofu. Tempeh, on the other hand, has more of a nutty flavor, so you're not going to need to season it as much. If that is more of your bag, then maybe go with tempeh. You can also use them in burgers, both of them, tofu and tempeh. Burgers, soups, chilies, anything that you want to put it in. I've seen it in a lot of ramen as well. Some of my friends also put eggs in their ramen. That's just the way that they like it. It's pretty common, to be honest. And the way that you prepare it just depends on you. So you can prepare those ramen eggs ahead of time if you want a more traditional type, or you can just dunk it in there. They're mostly going to be undercooked boiled eggs, but that you want them to be like a little bit gooey in the middle. They shouldn't be runny, but like the yolk should be gooey. But a lot of times they'll also soak them in something for a while as well. It just depends, but you can do it in a bunch of different ways to find what is best for you. Tempeh, tofu, and edamame all have iron, calcium, and somewhere between 10 to 19 grams of protein per that 3.5 ounces that we've really been using to discuss the lean and extra lean meats as well. So that's pretty cool. And edamame in particular also has a ton of folate, and folate is really important for your body, for your growth and metabolism with your cells. It's a B vitamin, and it's particularly important for women who are pregnant, or especially if they plan to become pregnant, because it helps with making DNA and other genetic materials. So if you're planning to become pregnant, don't wait until you are pregnant to start getting that folate. You really need it ASAP, and it's really important to have that in your body before you have a baby, because if you have a folate deficiency and you're pregnant, then that can cause some problems with the fetus. And a lot of times it's the parts of the body, the spinal cord and the brain that are growing in the baby are already forming by the time you figure out that you're pregnant. So if you aren't getting enough folic acid or folate in your diet right now, I encourage you to get that one. We learned about that in forensic anthropology courses, and it is very important. That one always stuck with me. If you're on birth control and stuff and you're not planning on getting pregnant, that's one thing, but it's helpful for your body. But definitely, if you are out there considering having a baby and wanting to try for one, look to your diet first as well and make sure that you have everything that the baby's going to need to grow. Folic acid deficiency can cause neural tube defects, and you want to have about 600 micrograms of that a day if you are pregnant. So keep that in mind. Talk to your doctor about it if you would like more information. It helps you produce red blood cells as well, and it's just very important for the baby. So that one is one of my pro tips and biggest concerns, actually, for people who are trying to have kids. So whenever my friends say they're going to try, that is the first thing that I say. think about your diet and nutrition right now, let's address that now before you get to the point where you're having to like give up things and change your diet for the baby. We want to prepare for it. We don't want to react to it. We want to be proactive in that way. You also can have lentils, and those have 18 grams of protein per cooked cup. They're a great source of protein. I like to put them in soups and food like dals, DAHLS. So they have a lot of spices in them as well, and they're quite delicious, especially with a little bit of rice. Lentils also have some good, slowly digested carbs though. And if you get a single cup of that, that is about half of your recommended daily intake for fiber. So if you are drinking more juices, or if you are having trouble with diabetes, in addition to wanting to try a vegetarian or vegan diet, or supplementing your diet with different types of protein instead of those red meats, this one is a really good one. Lentils are great for you, and you don't have to eat a lot of them in order to reap those health benefits. The type of fiber in lentils has also been shown to feed the good gut bacteria that's in your colon. So they call the gut the second brain. That's also where serotonin is made. So eat those lentils, and it's going to help you out a lot. It can help reduce the risk of obesity, some forms of cancer, heart disease risk, diabetes. It's super helpful all around. And as we discussed in the diabetes episode, it's because fiber is going to slow down digestion and allow your body to take up other forms of sugar that have fructose in them that your body does not normally process as quickly as it does glucose. Because the body wants that glucose. It's what it naturally uses. And with the fructose, that can be a lot for it. And then that can lead to insulin resistance. So we want to make sure that we're getting those fibers. Lentils are one of my favorite ways to do that. They have your folate, manganese, iron, a lot of antioxidants. They are the powerhouses of the bean family. So get you some lentils. They take seasoning really well. So you can just put about anything in them and they will be delicious. You can do chickpeas and most other varieties of beans, kidney, black, pinto, all the above. You can really get 15 grams of protein per cooked cup from those. You get complex carbs, fiber, iron, folate, all that jazz, just like you do with lentils. It's not as fun, I think, as lentils. It doesn't have as much going on as lentils, but they also have a lot of health benefits. And it can decrease your cholesterol, help you control those blood sugar levels by slowing down digestion so that you can appropriately get out the right amount of insulin and absorb the right amount of insulin, as well as process that fructose. And it can lower your blood pressure and even reduce belly fat, according to several studies. So try to eat more beans to help you with that. More chili, put some turmeric on some roasted chickpeas for a very delicious mix, and go from there. You can also have nutritional yeast. This idea is kind of weird to me, but I get it. A lot of my vegetarian friends do this, and it's like a yellow powder or flake. It tastes kind of cheesy, so a lot of folks put it in mashed potatoes, and you can even sprinkle it on top of popcorn because it's a powder. So if you like cheesy popcorn, you can do nutritional yeast. If you use it, you get 14 grams of protein and 7 grams of fiber per ounce. That is wild. Everything else we've been talking about is giving you about 15 grams of protein per cup, like per cup of cooked food. Whereas with this, it is per ounce. It's also a complete source of plant protein, so you get those essential amino acids as well. You can get zinc, magnesium, copper, manganese, and all of the B vitamins, including B12. So that's really great if they are fortified, but they're not always fortified. So you can't rely on getting vitamin B12 from those. So you'll have to get vitamin B12 a different way if they're not fortified. Read the nutrition labels. That's really what it all comes down to. Hemp seed in particular is really good for you as well. And I know a lot of folks are freaked out by that, but it comes from the cannabis sativa plant. That's okay. It's in the same family as the marijuana plant, but hemp seed only contains trace amounts of THC. It's not going to make you high. It should not make you high. There is not that much in it. And although it is not as popular as other types of seeds, hemp seed is a complete protein, so you get all those amino acids, and each ounce of it will give you 10 grams of that complete digestible protein. That is 50% more than flaxseed or chia seeds. It is very underutilized. You can also get a ton of magnesium, iron, calcium, selenium, and zinc from it. So if you watch the movie Evolution with David Duchovny and they're trying to kill the aliens with selenium, they used Head & Shoulders dandruff shampoo for it, but perhaps they could have used a crazy amount of hemp seed. It's fun to think about. But it can also just make your body feel great. It's a great source of omega-3 fatty acids, and its ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids is considered to be one of the best for human health. So it's pretty perfect as a source of protein, and you can use it to supplement your food. It's really easy. You don't have to eat a lot of it in order to get all of these benefits either. So I think that's really a great thing about these hemp seeds. They don't have a lot of fat in them or anything either. And the type of fats found in hemp seed may actually help reduce inflammation. And certain studies have indicated that they may diminish symptoms of PMS, menopause, and certain types of skin disease. So you can get you some hemp seed by putting it in your smoothie or in your morning cereal. It is really chill to get, and you can also use it in salad dressings or protein bars. So if you're a poppy seed salad dressing type of person, maybe try hemp seeds. You can purchase it online. It is not illegal. It's just a seed. It's just like chia seeds. It's not going to make you high, and it is really healthy for you. All right, everyone. That is all I have for you today. There are tons of more information out there regarding different types of protein for vegans and vegetarians, as well as different types of protein for carnivores and omnivores out there. We should all be omnivores, really. Man cannot survive on a diet of meat alone. We would get scurvy. So we want to make sure that we are getting these different proteins in our diets, and I hope this has really helped you guys learn today how to pick these out in the grocery stores or online to work best for you. I encourage you guys to learn a little bit more about animal anatomy. If you are omnivores, it's going to help you out a lot in the long run when it comes to making healthy choices for your food. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Health and Wellness Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.